Shalom and welcome to another lesson in our series, The People of Israel Are Coming Home. A series of lessons in the book of Joshua. Today we are studying Perek Kaf Gimel, chapter 23. We are coming close to the end of the book. We have finished dividing the land among the different tribes, given out the cities of refuge and the cities to the Levites. The tribes of Gad and Reuven and the half of Manasseh have returned to their land on the eastern side of the Jordan River. And now the final two chapters of the book of Joshua conclude with a speech that Joshua gives to the people as he's saying goodbye. Actually, the speech given in chapter 23, Perek Kaf Gimel, was probably after the one in Perek Kaf Daled, chapter 24. We will elaborate that story when we study chapter 24. But in this chapter, Joshua is calling the people, "Vayihi miyamim rabim asher hiniach Adonai Elohei Yisrael mikol oivehem misaviv Yehoshua zaken ba bayamim." It was many years after Hashem had given respite to Israel from all the surrounding enemies, and Joshua was old and advanced in years. Vayikra Yehoshua lechol Yisrael izkenav. And Joshua calls upon, summoned all of Israel, their elders, their heads, their judges, their officers, their shoftav, shotrav. Vayomer lehim ani zakanti bati bayamim. And he says to them, I have aged, I have advanced in years. And as it says in verse 14, V'hinei anochi holech hayom bederech kol haaretz. See this day that I am going the way of all the world. Going in the way of all the world, meaning today is my last day. Today I am here to say goodbye to you. And these are my last words to the people. Me, Joshua, I have led you from the day we have entered the land of Israel until after we conquered the land and we divided the land to the tribes. And today is the day I'm saying goodbye. But before I say goodbye, I would like to bring you back and remind you some very important messages. And he first starts off returning to what starts in the first chapter of the book. He repeats verse 3, "V'atem ri'item et kol asher asa Adonai Elohechem lechol hagoyim ha'ele." You have seen all that Hashem has done to all these nations before you. "Re'u hipalti lachem et kol hagoyim hanisharim ha'ele." I have allowed you victory over all the nations. "V'Adonai Elohechem hu yehadefem mipnechem." And Hashem will expel all the other nations from your presence. And then you shall take possession over the land. But, verse 6, strengthen yourself, v'chazaktem me'od, lishmor la'asot et kol ha'katuv b'sefer Torat Moshe. Strengthen yourselves greatly to observe and to fulfill all that is written in the book of the law of Moshe. This, of course, reminds us what Hashem had told Joshua in the very beginning of the book of Joshua, in chapter 1, where God says to Joshua after the death of Moshe, "Moshe, my slave, has died, and you, Yehoshua, his attendant, you will lead the people, but chazak ve'ematz, be strong, rak chazak ve'ematz me'od, be very strong, lishmor la'asot kechol ha'torah asher tzivcha Moshe." Be strong, only be strong and courageous to observe and fulfill in accordance with the Torah. These words Joshua says to the people when he is giving his last speech. V'chazaktem me'od, verse 6 in chapter 23. You should strengthen yourself greatly to observe and to fulfill all that is written in the book. But then he concludes with two sentences, using the same word in Hebrew, levilti, not to, so that not to. Levilti sur mimenu yamin usmol, meaning you shall not deviate from it to the right or to the left. Keep the Torah strictly, completely. And this appears also in verse 1, in chapter 1, in verse 7. Al tasur mimenu yamin usmol. Do not depart from it neither to the right or to the left. But then he continues on, and he says another sentence. Another using the word levilti, so that not to. Levilti vo bagoyim ha'ele, hanisharim ha'ele itchem, uveshem Eloheim lo tazkiru, velo tashbiu, velo ta'avdum, velo tishtachavu lahem. Not to come into these nations, those still remaining with you. You should not mention the name of their gods. You should not cause others to swear by them. You should not serve them, and you should not bow down to them. This sentence does not appear in the beginning of the book. And what is the concept that we see over here? Joshua is coming to the people. He says to them, God has observed, has every one of his promises has become reality, has materialized. Every one of the promises. He said, we will manage to conquer the land. We're managing to conquer the land. But from here, that's not enough. You have to strengthen yourself on two things. One is to continuing settling the land. Because the fact that Joshua led the army and led the people of the army and they managed to conquer the land, that's not enough. Because they have to settle in the land. They have to be strong to do what God has commanded them to do, obliged them to do. And that is to settle in all throughout the entire land. So that those who are remaining here, from the other nations, who have their gods, who are idol worshippers, who are representing the lowest of human culture, these people have to be inherited from here. Because very often, an army can conquer a land, but refer to those who are there as the locals, and not feel at home. Joshua says, you have to strengthen yourself to feel that this is your land. God gave you a mission to take over this land so that you should help and call the name of God to all the nations. But that's not enough. Because if you strengthen yourself and you settle in the land, but you still don't feel this is your land, what could happen? Slowly, you marry off with the nations that are here. You accept upon yourselves their culture. You accept upon yourselves their gods. You become yourself swallowed by them. Sometimes you can have victory in the field of the battle, but lose in the field of taking advantage of that victory in the battle. Meaning, if you don't understand, you're not guests in this land. You're not strangers in the land. This is your homeland. You're coming to the homeland in the name of God. And do not lose self-confidence in yourselves. And do not start doing what happened to others. And he repeats exactly what Moses had said in the book of Numbers. In the book of Numbers, in chapter 32, verse 50, and God says to Moses, tell the people of Israel that you shall dispose all the residents of the land, destroy all their temples, eradicate all their molten images, destroy all their high places. Why? Verse 55, if you do not banish the residents of the land, those that you will leave shall be spikes in your eyes, thorns in your sides. Joshua uses the exact same terminology as he says in verse 11, take good care of yourselves. Let Le'ahavat Adonai Elohechem, to love the Lord your God. For you should turn away and cleave to the rest of these nations, these remaining with you, by intermarrying with them, with mixing with them. You should know with certainty that the Lord your God will not continue to banish these nations before you. And then what will happen? They will be a snare and an obstacle to you. They will be lefach ulemokesh uleshotet betzidechem velitzninim be'einechem. They will be a goad in your side and thorns in your eyes. If you don't understand that this is your land and you're here in the name of God, slowly, gradually, you will mix with the other nations and accept upon yourselves their cultures. God gave you this land for a purpose, so that you should remember that you have a mission here. And Joshua says to them in verse 14, Hinei anochi holech hayom. Exactly as Moses says to them in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 31, Hinei anochi hayom lo uchal letzet velavo, v'Adonai amar elai lo tavor et hayarden. Today is my last day, and this is my message to you. But he uses here a very special terminology. Used here, Anochi holech bederech kol haaretz, I am going in the ways of all the people. The same exact terminology is used once again by King David in the book of Kings, chapter 2, verse 2. Anochi holech bederech kol haaretz, I'm going in the way of all the world. What does it mean, I'm going in the way of all the world? In order to understand this, I believe we have to search and look at a verse, a very interesting verse, in the book of Zechariah. Zechariah, towards the end of the books of prophets, Zechariah uses the following terminology. I'm reading in the book of Zechariah, in chapter 3, verse 7. And I will grant you, you make strides among these angels who stand here. Angels stand. Only people who live in this world who are dynamic, can walk, can make steps. Joshua says, I am walking. When a person comes to a point where he dies, he stops walking. How can he continue walking? If those who continue his deeds continue going in that way. So when he says, here I am going in the way of all the world, he says to them, just exactly as King David says to his son, I have a few things I didn't have time to take care of. Please go in my footsteps and take care of them. Finish up all the things that are unfinished. Joshua is saying to people, I have reached a point where my days are finished. I don't want to reach a point where I'm a standing person. I want to continue walking. The way somebody can continue walking is those who continue in his ways, fulfill his things he began. And Joshua says to the people, we conquered the land. The land is now in your hands. The question whether you will settle in the land, the question whether this will be your homeland, the question whether you will fulfill the mission of God is now not in my hands. It's in your hands. Now, if you do what you are responsible for doing, feel this land as your homeland, get rid of idol worshippers, make sure to get rid of all of their culture, and remind yourself at all times you have to be strong, because you are here for a mission, to call to the world in the name of Hashem. Shalom.